my hip. Or at least that's what I would be saying if I was Floyd Landis in the first press conference in the Tour de France rest day, because he is a big crybaby, and someone needs to tell him that you're supposed to make excuses after you've lost the race, not a third of the way through a 3-week Grand Tour. Speaking of losers, certified fraud of the year Tom Boonen lost again on stage 9, this time losing out to Oscar Freire. And the next day, there was another big loser, this time being the man in the yellow jersey, Sergei Honchar, who got dropped on the very first mountain of the Tour and ended up losing the yellow jersey. The stage ended up being fought out by the breakaway, with Cyril Dessel and Juan Mercato fighting out between them, with Mercato winning the stage and Dessel taking the yellow jersey. And now it is time for a quiz, and this week's quiz is about the Cold War. Question 1. Did the Cold War end in the 20th century? If you said yes, you are stupid. Question 2. Were there any head-to-head fights between Russians and Americans during the Cold War? If you said no, you are an idiot. And question 3. Who won the Cold War? If you said America, you could not be more wrong. The Cold War ended on the 13th of July 2006 after the only head-to-head battle between Americans and Russians, which took place at the top of the Pla de Beret in Spain. The combatants on the American side were Levi Leipheimer and whiny bitch Floyd Landis, and on the Russian side there's just one man who goes by the name of Denis Menchov. Now, at this point in time, Denis Menchov was technically the winner of the 2005 Vuelta a España, because the original winner, Roberto Heras, had failed a drugs test and been stripped of his title. But he did go back afterwards, and in 2011 asked very nicely for the Spanish authorities to give him the win back. And they did, which just goes to show all you have to do to overturn drugs bans and being stripped of your results is to just ask nicely, which is a shame for Lance Armstrong, because that man has never done anything nicely in his entire life. The 3 Cold War contestants were initially joined by Cadel Evans, Andreas Kloden, and Carlos Sastre, but they were all dropped by attacks from Menchov and Leipheimer, and in the end it came down to a sprint between the 3, which was won by Denis Menchov, avenging the fall of the USSR and winning the Cold War for Russia. However, it was not all bad news for the Americans, as Cyril Dessel was nowhere to be found, and Floyd Landis managed to gain enough time to take the yellow jersey from him by 10 seconds. Things were not looking so good for the American team Discovery Channel, who had won the past 7 tours in a row with Lance Armstrong. But with him now gone, there was only one rider from their team within 9 minutes of the yellow jersey, and just to prove how washed they were, he crashed halfway through stage 12 and ended up withdrawing from the race. However, it was not all over for them, as they had a man in the breakaway in Yaroslav Popovych, who managed to drop Oscar Freire and ride to a solo victory, rescuing something for the team. The next day's breakaway didn't seem notable in any way, with the highest positioned rider being 46th placed Oscar Pereiro, who was over 28 minutes down on Landis, meaning his team could just ride at a leisurely pace on the front, and Landis would comfortably keep his yellow jersey. However, Landis decided that being in the lead of the race wasn't a priority for him, so told his team to stop riding, and the peloton lost more than 30 minutes on a flat stage, which is unheard of, and Floyd Landis gave away the yellow jersey with no resistance whatsoever. Have you no pride? In fact, they finished so far back that the entire peloton finished outside of the time limit, and if the rules had been enforced correctly, everybody apart from the 5 riders in the breakaway would have been disqualified, which I personally think they should have done. I would pay good money to see a Tour de France being ridden with just 5 random breakaway guys in it. The final stage before the second rest day is one of my personal favourite routes that the Tour goes down. It is the descent into Gap that 3 years earlier Lance Armstrong had ended up riding across a farmer's field to avoid José Boboloki, who had crashed right in front of him. This year, there were still crashes, but not any involving the major favourites, and the stage was won by Pierre Rodrigo, who finished just 7 seconds ahead of the peloton. So going into the second rest day, Oscar Pereiro was leading the race with a 1.5-minute lead over Floyd Landis. My rider of the week this week goes to Denis Menchov for single-handedly winning the Cold War. And as always, a big thank you for Audi for letting me use their shopping trolley.